growth team, which was a restructured mechanism compared to how traditionally product and market teams have been built. But I've heard Anuj on multiple forums before, and he has very interesting set of opinions on stuff that they've been able to build at Swiggy, and I really respect that organization a lot. And he's had an amazing growth journey at Swiggy over the last few years. And now, from what I understood, he's doing the whole cross-pollination between the Instamart world and the food world and whatever additional services Swiggy is offering. So there's a lot of org level design that goes into building that level of complexity. Because, for example, if you put the acquisition guy up there and your retention guy is right here, in the org structure, whatever hierarchy structure, you're in for a toss, right? So I would rather have him talk about the journey of building the growth org at Swiggy, how it was in the 0 to 1 or the early days, and then how it's evolved from there. I'm hoping and expecting a lot of you guys will be able to get a lot of inspiration / ideas on how you can define your organization's look at growth more consistently, sensibly, well planned.
Awesome, thanks, Ankur, and we'll keep on chatting. So it's not only going to be a one-way conversation. So, look, I think Swiggy has had a very interesting journey. We started in 2014. I joined in 2016, and in the first couple of years, what we saw was just a hockey stick growth. Like there are very few organizations which just start and you hit that amazing growth curve. And we were really not demand constrained; we were supply constrained to begin with. And
because Foodpanda did all that homework for 5 years, right?
Right. And when you're supply constrained, the real growth unlocks are going to happen through supply. They're not going to happen through demand. So literally every day when users used to come and they're like, we used to have this term called banner factor. They used to be a big ugly banner that used to come which says, sorry, delivery boys are not available right now, etc. And banner factor was really the number of delivery executives to the number of customers who are knocking at the door. And we would basically decide 1.4 pe chalate hain, which means 40% people will just say, hey, we'll take the order, but we'll deliver you later in time, and so on, right? So anyway, coming back to like the growth org, literally at that time there was no growth org. There was really, we were not like very interested in looking at cohorts or understanding acquisitions, etc. Because word of mouth was powerful. Every location we used to go to, it would just explode and so on and so forth. We were also a three-way marketplace. So in a lot of cases, that the whole LTV-based growth modeling, etc. also did not work.
Marketplace is the riders, the restaurants, and the consumer. And
That's
LTV
right.
is lifetime value. I was given this feedback yesterday that guys, you're using jargon on stage, please don't do that. If you do, then please clarify. So lifetime value. I'm assuming by now everybody understands that, but please don't.
Right. So I'll set some context on the marketplace bit, right? Like, which is, just put things in perspective. Like say Amazon is a two-way marketplace. And I've used this example multiple times. And where you're connecting buyers and sellers. And it's very complex because there are millions of products really. And the complexity is from like, of these millions of products, how do I surface the right kind of products? How do we make sure that they're warehoused properly, their shipping is done in the right way and so on. It's complex, just the matchmaking. Compare and contrast with say Uber, which is also a two-way marketplace, but you don't have millions of products. You have 5 SKUs. Like SKU stock keeping unit, but 5 choices. Swiggy or really any food delivery company, even Zomato or Grab or anyone else, they're three-way marketplaces. I mean, they are, in terms of complexity, they're a multiplication of an Amazon and an Uber, because really everything is moving on the ground like Uber, like an Uber when your drivers are moving. In a Swiggy, everything on which is like at the base of your marketplace is moving. But for the consumer, they expect to see an Amazon-like experience, which is like tuck, e-commerce experience. And whereas in reality, something else would have changed. It's also a moving marketplace. So literally every 100 meters from here, the app is different. 1 minute from now, the app is different, etc. Right? So that's the inherent complexity. Now coming back to how did we design the growth hog there? We were just hitting that hockey stick growth, and at some point of time, we basically said, hold on, we don't really understand what's happening with us. Now once we stabilized that marketplace and we understood the operations, we understood how do we run this in a reasonably non-burning fire way. That's where we started looking at, all right, now let's think about growth in a very proper way. What are these consumers that we have acquired? How many of these consumers have come because of discounts? How many of these consumers are going to give us any kind of value in the future? And it's not only about the users. Now look at the drivers. What is the driver retention looking like? Why are 18% drivers churning month on month, and so on? Let's look at restaurants. How many new restaurants have come in, and what are customer favorite restaurants, and what are the restaurants that will really drive growth? How can we help them grow as well? So if you're a pizza selling restaurant which has only 4% pizza eaters who have eaten with you in this area, how can you take it to 10%? What are the growth levers that we can give them? So we really had to start thinking about growth in like an all-encompassing three-way marketplace way, and we had to find out win-wins. So I think the first framework that we followed, that do not build an unstable marketplace. Build a marketplace which is, and we called it the 4W framework. Like if it is a win-win-win-win, like it's a win for the customer, win for the restaurant, win for the delivery partner and Swiggy, that is like highest rank growth. The second one is like 3Ws, at least 3 should win. And the last one is where only Swiggy wins and everybody else loses. So those are things that we don't do. so
we don't confess that we do.
Yeah, so we started from there, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't only focus on the user side, and now we have evolved into an organization which understands the business. Of course, the scale is a lot larger, so all of these different teams have their own growth teams.
You have all the 3 marketplaces, or rather 3 elements of the marketplace have their own growth teams.
They have their own growth teams, and what the team that I'm running is, when you combine all of these together, how do you run a central revenue and growth team? So that's the team that I run.
Zoom in on the consumer side for a moment, because I'm sure for the amount of time we have, we can't do all. On the consumer side, when you realize that your cohorts are going to be needing attention, and what was the first bunch of hires? Was this like a project group of sorts that you assemble people from different teams and now you're building this SPG of sorts? Or was it like a bunch of fresh hires? Now you're going to be doing growth. What was it?
So your question has a lot of assumptions built in. We didn't build the growth org like a Twitter or a Facebook would have built it. Even on the consumer side, we really actually started looking at it in a different way. We had something called a 4BBs framework. We got cheesy and we said, okay, how are we going to achieve growth on the consumer side also? So one, we said that first BB is big bets. What are the large bets that we have to take? Like consumers, like of course you can look at cohorts, etc. But really the large businesses or the large 0 to 1s that we can find out. Actually not very large, but medium-sized bets that we can take. So for example, our loyalty program came out of that, or membership program, or some of different delivery businesses like meat, etc. came out of that. So that's first BB. The second one was Breaking Bad. Where is like Swiggy exactly going to go out and building a category which was never even possible? So Instamart, for example, or Genie was, for example, it came out of that. Then there is the third BB, which is bread and butter, like literally small functional changes, bug fixes, constant improvements on the roadmap. If you would let a product manager do, or a product manager plus a marketer do the things that they have to do, that was the third BB. And the fourth one is what we call brilliant basics. It's really the technology investments that you would want to make, so that
boring to the predictable to the point of being boring. I think that's the word I've heard you.
What is that?
Predictable to the point of being boring about your service.
That's right. Yes. So with this framework, we actually built the entire team. We did not think about a growth team. We said, how can the organization overall can be geared towards growth in one of these areas. So it's not only when we were looking at, for example, even our search teams. So we said, okay, through brilliant basics, how can you like expand or give us the metrics or give us the experience that a user wants that can drive growth. From the marketing side, we said that what are the bets that you want to take? So literally every team was built like that. There was not a separate growth team.
This is a cross-functional responsibility to drive growth. It's not
That's
like
right.
one team's job and everybody else doesn't care. That's what I hear.
I 100% agree with you. So it's the entire organization has to be wired towards growth and should have a growth mindset and should not look at their job only to drive their functional benefits, but really think about how can I drive growth for the company. What will also help is the company has kind of a growth model which they themselves understand and it's well published inside the company. So at Swiggy, for example, we have created like a very simple kind of growth model. I'm sure like a lot of people, if you can like just Google Uber's growth model or Amazon's growth model, it'll just be like a tiny piece of paper and like 5-6 things that are coming together and saying this is how we grow. And that's usually not a growth model which is only from the consumer point of view. It's a marketplace, so it'll have like a whole bunch of other things as well.
In the interest of the focus on the conversation, I want to keep it on the people side of things.
Yes.
So, what are the different sets of people / skills / levels, and how do you organize that part?
Right. Because till now, we did not have a growth org. And so I'll move into now that we have a growth org, how we organize around that, right? So in this journey, when we finally said that, all right, now all the teams are doing their basic jobs, etc., but we were seriously not understanding our cohorts in the right way, and people who can really tie all of these things together. Now that you have multiple business units, and now that you have like a lot of different funnels in which you want to look at, simple insights. For example, we know that a user is activated on Swiggy if they order 4 times a month. First, if they download the app and order 4 times a month, then they're activated on Swiggy. What does activation mean? That your probability of ordering next month on Swiggy is very high. Like that's activation. That is true.
Most people use a much shallower target for that. A single order is considered activated, customer acquisition cost, right?
And that's
but fourth order is very
yeah. So we have seen our cohorts like that, right? It's true also if you order from Instamart 4 times, and that's great. So both the teams were looking at these cohorts. But really the insight here was, even if you order once on food and once on Instamart, you are activated. So you don't need to make the customer activate or order from both of them, right? So one is this team. So we were basically looking at where are these insights come from. So you have to really build an org which can derive these insights, which can create hypotheses. Like this data, for example, could be correlation, it could be causation. Does it also mean that if I just make you order, if you order food and then Instamart, will you also display the same behavior? We don't know that, right? So you have to have insights. You need to build hypotheses. You need to build experiments on top of those hypotheses, and then you need to look at data. And from that data, you need to generate insights. So it's a creative scientific method. It's nothing new. It's been followed across the world like that. So we needed to literally think about a team which follows this entire scientific method. The insights can be small or large. With each insight, there can be multiple hypotheses. Each hypothesis can have multiple experiments. Multiple experiments can give you variety of data. So we looked at a team which extremely curious people. That's literally the starting point. Big hustlers, and I'll tell you why it is important in a growth team to have that. People with a tinkering mindset, rather than I want to only build large 0 to 1s who are never going to give up, even if it's like a small change. It could be a copy change. You're showing something which says buy now. Instead of that, can I change it to buy this now, etc. That's an example of an experiment. I'm saying that Swiggy is not there yet, by the way, where we will do all of that. But really, the kind of people that you'll need in the growth team who's exclusively looking for that is this kind. Now, the reason why I also say hustle is important here. Usually, even if you don't have a growth team, your organization is complete. It's doing everything that it needs to. And when you put a growth team together, they are going to step on a bunch of other people's shoes. And it's never going to be very smooth sailing. So I've heard it from so many people.
I was going to head at because I originally started out with the idea that we'll be writing a bunch of new JDs. Yeah, I want to build a growth team. Let's write these JDs. What it looks like from what you're saying is, don't write new JDs, rewrite a bunch of existing JDs. But what happens then? That's where probably that the shift has to be. So you said that people will be stepping on the other's shoes, and that won't work very smoothly. So how do you navigate this?
Look, let me take an example of an experiment and why I'll say people step on each other's shoes, right? You already may have, if you're running an e-commerce company, you already may have a team which is looking at, say, checkout and payments and so on. And they have their own roadmap and they are also experimental, a little bit thing and so on. And same is the case with your search team, and same is the case with maybe acquisition team, etc. But really, when you're looking at the growth team, they are operating at the entire cross section. So whatever experiments they are proposing will be a part of anywhere somebody else's experiment, maybe in a different priority list, but you're not focusing on that. So it will happen. And instead of trying to fight that battle, make sure that you understand that and explain it to other members, and establish that team and empower that team so that they are able to move fast still. So that's the way that I would recommend that you build a growth team. And
if you were to just go a little more chronologically on this, that when you started to build out this growth, reorganize the team around growth, let's put it that way. What were the first bunch of steps? Were there designation changes, personal changes, GD changes? Some people got to know that they're going to be doing this more than what they were doing previously. Or you put a bunch of new people with the skills that you mentioned about hustle as well as experimentation and tinkering. So what was that set like? Because what we see here, and the question I would love to address with the audience as a single takeaway from here is, if I have to start looking at my growth efforts more aggressively next Monday morning onwards, what do I do today to kind of build that out? Right? And if I were to go backwards from a 5-year picture, maybe that's also a right way to do it.
Exactly. I think that's the second part is the right way to look at that. And what I was explaining to you was a central growth team, one team that does exclusively this. But that's not what my entire org structure is going to look like, right? So what are my big levers of growth? I really need to take a step back and basically say, what are these big levers? So first big lever for me for growth is really acquisition and activation. And that is a reasonably separate thing that you can build without rustling feathers and so on. So build out that team, pair it with marketing, empower it with budgets, but you run it the way that I talked about. That's one. In my case, there's another team which is a very clear growth team, is the membership team. Membership means Swiggy One. It's reasonably straightforward that we will be able to drive a lot of growth and cross-pollination through this one. The other teams that, for example, drive growth or exclusively growth, in our case, even as merchandising and traffic team. And
do you repeat that?
Merchandising and traffic.
Merchandising traffic.
Merchandising and traffic.
Merchandising and traffic. Okay.
That's right. So the reason why I say that this is also an important lever. So Swiggy's storefront is different in 500 cities. It's not a national catalog. So every place will have a different storefront and every slot is different. So breakfast, it looks different and evening it looks different, etc. So really, where do you want to drive traffic? In our case, that is also a part of the growth team. So anyway, coming back to you.
We'll be slightly overwhelmed very soon because Swiggy is a super mature stage now. So it'd be hard to back calculate from there. So you can probably help us break this down a bit.
Sorry, say that again.
If you could help us break this down a little bit, because now, of course, you're a very, very mature and a rather complex org, and I'm a little concerned you might not be able to back calculate from there as to what a starting point or what an early leap should look like.
Got it. So how do you start essentially building or thinking about the growth org, right? So the way we actually did that, earlier we were only a single category org. The reason when we said that we have to think about a growth org is when we started becoming a multi-category org. And if you become a multi-category org, for example, food and Instamart and Genie and others, etc., so each of them, we are looking them as business units, complete with their own growth orgs and everything. But they are essentially looking at different levers of growth. Their levers of growth, for example, would be, hey, if you're ordering lunch, how can I make you order dinners as well? If you're ordering from this location, how can we make you order from there, etc. So all of these different kind of organizations or BUs are complete. And the way that we have to think about it, what touches all of these things together so that you can build a unique relationship with a user. And that's the part of the central revenue and growth org. So once you have that set up, really you have to think about two things. This revenue and growth org essentially have to think outwards, which is maintaining the relationship, building the relationship with the user, and how do I serve all of these business units also? Because really what you're helping them do is achieve their own goals with a lot less cost and a lot better outcomes from a user point of view. So that's how I would say that you should think about it.
Sure. So now if you were to zoom in into any of your lines of business, as you call it, probably the food business, it has its own growth team. So what does that look like and how is that organized?
Got it. So that growth team, for example, my growth team essentially has a point of view on how do we get customers to install the app and how do I actually get you traffic? And that's where our contract ends. The growth team within food growth, for example, is going to look at things around what can I do within the food business to grow a lot with this customer. So one example I talked about is how can I get this customer to order from a different location or order from a different slot. This customer has not ordered dessert at all till now. How can I...
I hate to do this to you, Anuj, but do I need an analyst first? Do I need a campaign manager first? I'm really going to that level of basics simply because that's where a lot of us are in our journey.
Right. I think you need, so at least like that's the way that we have organized. We get a leader first, and the leader in this case, for example, we got a product/marketing leader who actually understands the business well, and that product/marketing leader actually builds their team with all the properties that are out there. So they, for example, have an analyst, have two analysts actually. They have like a bunch of growth product managers within them, and they have a bunch of engineers dedicated towards that, and also a designer. So once you start with the leader, then they define what does a growth roadmap look like and what are the areas or themes that they want to actually go after.
There is growth product managers, there's analysts, and there is a leader who's a product marketing or product/marketing guy.
Right.
And how does the handshake with acquisition happen? Is there a handshake?
There is a handshake, of course, because there's a central growth team which is going to acquire a user. That's the CAC for my team. But then once we get that user, it's, as I said, like we also have a traffic team. So do I divert the traffic towards food or to Instamart? That is in our hands. And we essentially work with their budgets. So we get their budgets and we have a contract. So my team has a rate card. How many users does food business want to acquire? And with this rate card, I'm going to give X number of users. What is your budget? And once we get the users to the food team or Instamart team, then how do they grow their businesses, their jobs?
Sure. So I'm going to again go back to the same structure. You have the product marketing lead, then you have a couple of growth product managers. There's a certain amount of engineering bandwidth associated with this as well. And this is a pod by itself in some sense because
it is a pod by itself.
Independent decision-making ability on running experiments, designing hypotheses, coming up with those experiment ideas, and coming back with insights to go back with it. This is the fun fact, right? You have a certain degree of engineering bandwidth allocated and focused with a growth product manager. Now, that's the most interesting part for me to kind of double click on, because I've been on the CRM side of things, and we always thought that if I have to keep going to the product and engineering team for stuff that I need done, in their queue of 50,000 things, it's going to be hard to prioritize. Is that something you also saw, and that's why?
100%, 100%. Because look, to grow, you have to not only look at like things that you can do only on existing tech stack or existing capabilities that you have. There may be ideas that are simple or complex that will require you to build technology. And if you're going to always be constrained with, hey, a business team or a growth team should just be running some experiments on the basis of, externally I can do this or I can run a different campaign, etc. Those are all fine. But when you combine it with product and technology, then really the gamut of ideas that you can try out and that will really drive growth is going to be like much higher.
That I felt the worst about, the limitation of not having enough product and engineering bandwidth allocated to retention or marketing, whatever roles I've been working on, was a hassle. And what it seems like is it's a recognized problem. It's an addressed problem now, and it seems to be a more mature way of looking at this. That traditionally, the way you've built organizations, you had a product management team, you had a marketing team, within which you will have those paid channel acquisition folks. You might have somebody for SEO, and you have somebody who's looking at CRM, which are traditionally your emails and SMS and WhatsApps and whatever channels. And this is somehow also the guy who's supposed to work on retention. So all of this is supposed to add up to get you repeat rates and cohorts. But if that's where the org is designed, it's designed for a bit of a troublesome situation, because the guy who's looking at emails is not the guy who can actually influence product to do much. Which then structurally becomes a growth limiter. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. I think the magic also happens because when the guy who is looking on, say for example at push notifications, and there's an engineer who's working at that. But if both of them are different teams and one is building a roadmap only for programmatic push notifications and somebody else who's actually building the strategy on how should I do this myself, if they're both working together and build one unified strategy and then build growth experiments on top, that's kind of the best of both worlds.
So, to me, the message that at least seems very interesting as a takeaway from this is breaking those silos between product and marketing functions and really look at your growth as a standalone sort of unit where you can empower these people with the ability to test ideas, the ability to hypothesize, the ability to make experiments. A whole bunch of them will fail, but by the end of it, they'll come up with some which will end up giving you the growth that you're desiring.
There's the other point of view also, right? Because on marketing, there are a lot of budgets involved. And usually, they tend to shy away from programmatic way of deploying those budgets. In many cases, I've seen that.
Sure.
Especially if it is external. In our case, discounting and marketing, they go hand in hand. So for a new user, you also need to give them a brilliant offer to work. Right. So if you have a brilliant solution that is ready on the technology product side, but which needs budget, and now because these people are working together, you can look at them together and then do the right deployment of budgets.
In fact, the company is dead, so I can talk about it openly now. So I used to run CRM for Jabong at one point. It's still premature times, so it wasn't as mature as a practice. So there's a product manager for the mobile app, and this is still the time of 2013. So you have Android phones is coming out. The product manager needed a new UX design. He wanted to appoint a consultant to get that to happen. He went for a budget approval to the head of product, and who went to the CTO and whatever. That loop took like a couple of weeks to complete. And since we are a marketing team, we would invite the product team over to have a conversation that, what's our go-to-market, what a launch plan for the application. So he took 3 weeks to get his approval for 2.5 lakhs. We took 10 minutes to approve 20 lakhs on a single day of app launch to promote it. And he just couldn't digest it. What I see now is that these guys were on the same team. The marketing guys are the ones who spend any which way. The product teams somehow don't seem to understand the way to speed things up with money, probably. Or is it done better now?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the biggest unlocks that we have found when we have to think about better ideas, execute those ideas, deploy budgets, and really drive growth. If you're able to get them together and think as one team, that
but that's
works.
By design, because if you're saying that this is a unit which is being structured like this, now you might be able to assemble people with different skill sets, but their OKRs all together combined and they're looking at the same outcomes.
Correct.
Because there otherwise is 50,000 Jira tickets in the product queue, and the marketing guy will just again another company which I thought I'd taken a new role at, and I had this little tick box to be solved that a whole bunch of our people who are coming in are not getting signed up for our communications, and that's just a simple little tick box that needs to be implemented. I thought I would laugh at the previous guy who was there for a long enough time who couldn't get it done. It took me 18 months. I quit that company as well. The tick box was still not there. So I'm just telling you the realistic picture of how the silos of product marketing end up being a disastrous situation, simply because that simple little tick box would have given me ultimately a much larger base of users I could communicate with. right? And it somehow never fit the parity of the product folks because they had different fires to fight.
I'll give you another point of view here, or another good thing that happens once you're think about product and marketing kind of joint or together. Look, marketing job is external, like literally like outside of the app. Like if you're building a consumer business, right? So of the app, how are we speaking with the consumers? With what are the benefits and what are the right reasons to come and so on. And product's job is kind of internal. Once the user is inside, like how does it work? And I've seen so many disconnects between these two. It's really a part of two different journeys. It almost looks like two different companies built it. Like your ad looked so different. You were talking about some other benefits, but when I open it, it talks nothing. It looks nothing like that. Like for you look at, for example, so many IPL ads now this season, and think about this company was saying that that's why you should open my app and come. And you look at that app, it doesn't even mention IPL. It's like, are these you guys?
Yeah.
By combining these forces, or at least having some lines together between product and marketing, brand, growth marketing, and product, then it's just one unified story and it works much better.
One more fun anecdote. So WebEngage in its previous avatar, and I was a customer back then, used to be this pop-up tool that you can use across your website to just show and amplify messages. This was the time when discounting has suddenly become very fashionable. So you will have discounts running all the time. And the best place to make sure every single person visiting the website would know that there's a discount running is to show them a pop-up. Now, what it would also do, incidentally, is hide the filters that are there on your website, right? Because if somebody's searching for shoes, there's a bunch of filters on the left side, size, brand, whatever. The pop-up will come up here, it'll hide the filters. What do you think the product team felt about it? They hated us, of course. What did you think the CMO told me? Let them hate you. I still need this discount to be shown because eventually it's helping my transactions. If you were to be smarter about this, you would have probably found a way to, create some real estate on the website which is not intrusive and yet delivering the job.
Right.
But that's needed the two teams to collaborate, which hardly happened.
That's right, because it was two different teams thinking very differently for their own bunch of OKRs. Like my job is to get traffic and get this clicked, and somebody else saying my job is conversion. So yeah, we are disconnected.
So precisely where I think my hunch is a bunch of companies still continue to follow the slightly dated model of org, which needs to be rethought very clearly, because we don't break these silos, it will not unlock your growth.
Yes. But I'll go back to the original point that I was talking about actually here, Ankur. It will ruffle some feathers. You will step on a bunch of toes, and it's fine. Like, let's not try to solve world hunger by org design, but at the same time, let's at least solve for making sure that what the customer sees is a consistent brand message off and on the app. B, internally, we are actually optimizing for growth in a holistic way and not in a siloed way.
Yep. So this would be a lot of top-down drive, right? Because for a bunch of younger organizations, founder-driven plays, even for Swiggy, the first 5 years were very aggressively top-down driven. So I would imagine if you have conviction at the top level that you need to do this, whatever comes in the way has to be then removed as an obstacle.
Right.
You will have culture misfits who would not necessarily be very delighted about this, and those people changes might have to happen sooner than later, because the longer you spend with these silos, the bigger the stakes get, right? It just gets harder to change these things because it becomes a part of the culture. And if your silos are your culture, then God save you. In my simple terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's this Dunbar number, like which basically says 150 is the number, which is like the size of a tribe. I think that's the size of where everybody kind of knows each other and trusts each other, and when everybody knows that I can trust what you are doing and I know what I'm doing, and we can call each other and make that happen, right? Once your org size kind of starts becoming larger than that, like systems and processes will come in, and OKRs will kick in, and so on and so forth. And that's the time where you have to be very careful when you're designing the org.
Oh, absolutely. So, yesterday in the conversation with Adit from Zepto, one of the things he said was he didn't want a situation where they grew really aggressively. They hired left, right, center, whatever. And it turns out after a year and a half that his AVP is making less money than his senior manager and the director is somewhere else in the org, and it just became a mess. So in fact, within the first month or so of starting the operation, hired the Johnson & Johnson head of HR to really build the org nice. So his belief was on getting specialists on board on day zero to just not make mistakes, because they didn't have time to make mistakes. But what I hear you also say is a little degree of org design consciousness at the right time will end up being almost critically important to your success, because if you've not done it right in the initial stage, it'll be super hard to reverse it, fix it, change it.
Correct. They say that culture is strategy for breakfast, and I think org design eats culture for breakfast, because if you design your org wrong,
can I quote this to you? Is this an original?
I've tweeted this, so I don't know whether it's an original or somebody else.
That's a tweet that should go out for this conversation, right?
No, and I'll tell you why, right? Like if your org design, for example, even the way that you have If you have, for example, an AVP in one side and maybe like paired with a senior manager on the other, and so on, like the hierarchies are not the same. And if you have designed it by definition like that, it's very different than if you were to go with a flat hierarchy and so on. Like both of or many of these permutations may look different, and all of them will create a very different kind of a culture.
Absolutely.
And you have to be thoughtful when you are designing this org, because literally when you can keep on saying, hey, why is my culture like this, and why are decisions getting made in a certain way? But in a lot of cases, the answer really is A, org design, and B, ways of working. How are the original ways that you have thought that people will or should interact with each other? For example, OKRs is one way that, that's the operating system of your company. Instead of OKRs, if you're using something else, like these two things, org design and ways of working, will influence your culture a lot more rather than only people.
So, while we were doing a preview of this conversation, we said, right, the power equation between the retention guy and the acquisition guy, if it's not set right, the retention guy will say that you're acquiring trashy customers because they've just come in for the first discount and they're not coming back. The acquisition guy has his own goals in terms of growth and targets, and I'm sure Sachin here agrees. He's done a whole lot of that iteration experimentation because he's on his own trip and he's not able to control or influence it. For example, we saw a whole bunch of people acquired through a certain category of products. Maybe you'll discover that for a certain category of foods, which would never come back. Right? I mean, it doesn't make sense to run acquisition campaigns on those products because they're getting us bad customers. But if the retention guy can't influence those categories or those acquisition campaigns, the power equation is not set right, we have a problem.
Absolutely. And not only the power equation, in some cases there will be budget equations, in some cases it will be information asymmetry, in some cases it will really be like your org's ability to get two people together to jointly solve a problem. All of these then eventually reflect as like, hey, why is the culture of this org not so good or so good? Like
Awesome.
Either ways.
So in the interest of the timestamp that looks like 0, that we're not left with any more time in this session, the great takeaway for me is the fact that people take your org design way more seriously than you currently do, because we do this frivolously, casually right now. This is going to be a heavy price to be paid later. Thank you so much, Anuj, for this. Really helpful.
Thanks a lot, Ankur, and thanks everyone for attending.